Hi there and welcome to Car Mechanical. Today I'm going to take you through how to change your rear discs and pads, but I'm also going to take you through some general maintenance around that rear area and also how to paint your caliper. So before we get started, the main reason I'm doing this is I needed to change the discs and the pads. They had some usable life left in them, but they were pretty much done. One of the other things I wanted to do whilst I was back there is just sort some general maintenance with the rear arches. I found some problems up front before with a bit of dirt causing some rust that had got behind the arch covers. So as the car drives past, one thing you can hear there is you can hear the pad is rattling around, and we're going to come back to that a bit later on. But first thing is we need to get the car's wheel off, get it jacked up and get everything sorted out. So I'm going to undo the wheel bolts first. The wheel bolts or nuts are 17mm and there's a locking key as well. You'll see in another video, I'll pop a link to that in the description, that these can be a pain if you lose your locking key, so make sure you keep hold of it. However, we've got a video that I've put up where I actually managed to get that off using welding another bolt into it and undoing it that way. Now with those, these are coming off fairly easily with a cross brace because I've done them to 75 Nm of torque, but if you do get stuck, you can use a breaker bar if you have one. So before you jack the car up, you want to chock the wheels. Because you're going to take the handbrake off, you don't want it rolling away or towards you. Now luckily, I've got a tow bar. I've actually taken the tow bar part of the whole tow bar off. However, I can just jack off of the tow bar beam. So I'm going to jack the car up to start with. Then in a moment, once we see it clearing the ground, I'm going to take the wheels off. I'm going to support the car's body, and then I'm going to get to work in doing the bits and bobs I want to do in the rear wheel arch. Now one thing that might be handy, I'm just speeding this up as I undo everything. If you have got a pot or anything, so I'm making do with the hub cover, just pop all your bolts to one side. You don't want to lose them. As I mentioned, when you do lose it, it's a right pain in the backside. So we're going to get the last wheel off there. And as I'm watching this, I wish I'd sped everything up a little bit more by the time it came to the voiceover, but there you go. And we can see into the arch. So I'm just going to pop the car under the wheel, and that's just sort of as a emergency if it drops on there, but I do pop something under there, I think, maybe, not sure. So we can see the state of everything. We can see that that caliper is in a fairly bad state. Measuring it with a caliper measuring tool, we can see that it's about 8.5mm, and I think the minimum I can go down to was about 8mm. So what I'm going to do is, before I do anything else, I'm going to have a quick look at cleaning up some of that dust cover that's around there. It's quite sharp, it's quite corroded, and as I'm going to be having my hand in and around the rear arch, I don't want to cut myself. When I take the car to get my tyres changed, or anyone else that's going to be in and around the back wheel, I don't want it to get cut. I don't want it slipping off and maybe wedging itself in places that it shouldn't do. So I'm using a Dremel. You can use anything you've got to cut that away, as long as it's sort of appropriate, and be careful of the brake line at the same time. I'm actually further away from it than it looks in the video, but you do have to still be careful. So as I trim these off, it does start to neaten up, and I could have taken a decision to replace the dust shield, but I didn't think that was needed because it was just a little bit that sort of hovers around it as such. So you can see that last bit's nearly off. You just got to be careful with the Dremel because if it sort of flows with the direction of everything, and as it sort of slips, it moves. So again, like I said, be careful of the brake lines. So we're just about done there. Now, because I'm changing the disc, I'm really not fussed about the time I slip and hit the disc. There's just a picture of everything stripped back with the arch liner out, but we're just going to come and have a look at the spring there. As you can see, that's hanging a bit towards the rear of the car. So I'm going to get a spring compressor in there, and I'm going to compress the spring down, and I'm going to move it back a bit. Now, I struggled to get a pair of spring compressors either side, but I managed to get there with one spring compressor in the end. One of the other things I noticed whilst I was doing this was the corrosion. So I think some stone chips or something's happened where the covering of the spring has come off and everything's sort of eroding away underneath, but the spring generally is in good condition. At some point, when I have more time, I wouldn't mind taking the springs off and painting them or giving them some kind of cover and protection. but that's not something I'm going to cover off today. So you can see there, I'm just ratcheting it down, and we're just sort of slowly getting there. We can see it moving, and you can sort of see there just exactly where it's sort of hanging over to one side of the cup, and it should be sitting more centre on there. So the car didn't feel off, but seeing that was a bit of a concern, and I just wanted to get it sorted, because of if it was sort of moving over time, you want to get that there. So that's sort of fairly solid, but I think this is the point where we maybe tried a second spring compressor and didn't really get enough movement with the ratchet. Sort of pulling on everything to see how much movement I've got. I don't have a lot there. So I'm going to get something in there in a moment with some leverage, just so we can sort of shift that across a little bit. Again, maybe something I could sped up in the editing a bit more, but there you go. So I'm going to get in there with sort of a 2 to 3 foot adjustable wrench. It just works well to sort of move everything around. So you've got that nice leverage there, and it's moving on the cup. And what we end up with on the end result is it falls more centre. It's not perfect, but it's better than it was, and that's the key thing. So I'm leaving that in a much better place than we had found it. You potentially, you could do that with a breaker bar, or you could have done what I didn't do and fully compress the spring and then fully reseat it properly. But I found that this solution pretty much worked. It was an extra to dealing with the brakes. It wasn't the main reason for getting behind the wheel. It was something that pretty much noticed after getting it all off. And there you can see happier it's more seated compared to the left picture, which was before. Okay, so the next part's the arch liner. I think there's 6 or so torque screws to undo them. So you want to undo all of these. Again, if you've got nice little trays, or if you've got anything you can put your little torque screws into, just stick them all to one side. I'm just going to point out where they are quickly. So this is in the description for the video, but if you are watching and if you do happen to have one, this is for a 1993 Audi A3, 1999 even. So if it happens to match, because of some of these things can be a bit for pest to find, there you go. So taking the liner out, it's not too bad, but I'll show underneath it a bit. But I did find that this little part was blocked, so it's like the fuel overflow. And that leads through to just behind the liner. So just using a compressed air line, just gone behind there, and we're just blowing through some compressed air to blow out of the other side. Now again, looking at the arch liner, luckily it's just mainly muddy, but it does need a clean up, and you can sort of see there's some packed in dirt there. There was more when the liner first came off and it fell away. But what we want to do is get this all completely clean, so use whatever you've got to clean it out. And the main point of this is rust prevention. On a front arch liner, or in the front arches, one of the wings became rusty and needed replacing, and it's for exactly the same reason. Dirt had got behind the arch. The previous car owner used to do mountain biking. I can only imagine it, when he went off-road, that's how he started to get the dirt behind there, because I generally don't have it in situations where that would happen. So I'm just spraying it down to start with. So I was brushing, then spraying back. And in a minute I'm going to use something called Muck Off, which is good for cleaning down mountain bikes, but it's quite good in general for cleaning. And we can see as we're going along, I'm getting further and further towards sort of having nice, clean, painted metal as such. But as I do go through this, as it all gets cleaned up, I do find a couple of spots that do have a little bit of rust on them. So what I do there is give it a quick clean back, a zinc etch primer, and then just quickly cover it with some paint. Because of what I don't want to happen in the very long run is for the rust to work through the rear of the body, and that's the rear part done of the car, because the body isn't removable without cutting it out and welding bits and pieces in. That's not the level I think I'm after. I don't think many people want to be doing that at an amateur level. It pretty much end of car game. Luckily with the front wing it was replaceable, could throw it away and got a new one off eBay for cheap. So once you have cleaned everything, spray it down, and it should become clear where you've got any sort of problem areas that may need some attention. So as you start to get away years and years worth of dirt, you might find some little rust patches, you might find it's completely clean, and you might decide that the way that you're going to deal with it, you're going to just stick some wax oil or something on there. So we moved on to the next day, as you saw it was getting dark before, and it's time to look at changing the brakes. Now I've mentioned I wanted to paint the calipers, so the first thing I'm doing is I'm cleaning up the calipers as they're on there. A couple of ways we could do that. First way is with a wire brush, not the quickest method. Did just give it a quick try with a Dremel. That's a way if you're quite patient. If you've got plenty of time, you can go through it whatever way you want, but the wire brush and a Dremel are fairly slow compared to the next way that I'm going to try, which is using an airline and a sandblaster. And this just absolutely eats through any crap that's on there. It does a really nice job of bringing the caliper back to looking as to how it normally should do when it was like brand new. Now, one of the things just to point out here, I'm still doing this with the old disc on the car. That old disc is getting chucked afterwards. I really wouldn't recommend doing this with the disc on the car. But as I'm going over it with the sandblaster, you can see it's just stripping back that corrosion. And this is actually on the other side because it shows a little bit better as to how well it does work. But you can just see it just lifts it all off. It's almost effortless from what you're doing, and it just really cleans up the caliper quite nicely. That's the end of the first part of the video as we came to the end of the first day. Join me for part 2 where we'll replace the brakes and we will paint the caliper. Thank you very much.